Sometimes, the life you think you've built can change in an instant. All it takes is one discovery, one moment that turns everything upside down. I thought I knew the truth about my family, but what I found hidden in the attic changed everything. Ethan sat in the dimly lit living room, the low hum of the evening settling around him. The soft clatter of Mia's cooking echoed from the kitchen, but the warmth of home that once brought him peace now seemed strangely distant. He rubbed his temples, eyes drifting across the room, to the family photos lining the walls. In every picture, he and Mia looked happy, beaming even, as if life had finally handed them their long-awaited reward. The struggle to conceive, the years of doctors, treatments, and tears, it had all been worth it, or so he had believed. The twins, the beautiful, perfect twins, had saved their marriage. Or so he thought. The smell of garlic wafted into the room, snapping him back to the present. "Dinner will be ready in a few minutes," Mia's voice called from the kitchen. "Great, thanks," Ethan replied, his voice trailing off as his gaze returned to the photos. His eyes lingered on one of the earliest pictures of their marriage. It was from their honeymoon, a simpler time, when everything had felt new, exciting. Mia was radiant back then, with her light brown hair catching the sun's glow, and that laugh of hers, the one that seemed to come so easily. He remembered how, back then, they couldn't keep their hands off each other, how they dreamed of filling their future with love, adventure, and a family. A family. Ethan's chest tightened. The word hung in his mind, heavy with a weight he couldn't shake. After 10 years of marriage, the joy of their early days felt distant, like a song that had grown faint and out of tune. He had always imagined that once they had children, everything would fall into place. And for a time it did, but something had changed. Something about Mia, about their relationship. It was subtle at first, but the distance between them had grown, widening into an empty, aching space. He glanced toward the kitchen, listening to the quiet clinks and shuffles of Mia's movements. She was always busy now, always preoccupied with something. She had a way of filling the air with noise, of keeping herself distracted. But there was an absence between them, a coldness. They barely talked about anything meaningful anymore. Every conversation felt mechanical, centered around logistics or the boys, never about them. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, his mind wandering back to the early days of their marriage. They had struggled at first. Mia had been stressed with work, and they had both been eager to start a family. When they couldn't conceive, it broke them both in different ways. Mia had always been more guarded with her emotions, but he had seen the pain in her eyes every time another pregnancy test came back negative. He stood up from the couch and walked toward the kitchen, stopping at the doorway. Mia was stirring something in a pot, her back to him. "Do you need any help?" he asked, more out of habit than actual intent. Mia glanced over her shoulder, flashing a small, tired smile. "No, I've got it. Just sit down, you look exhausted." "Yeah," Ethan muttered, leaning against the doorframe. Long day at work. The silence between them stretched, thick and uncomfortable. He wanted to say something, to break the tension that had settled over their home like a heavy fog. But the words never came. "How was your day?" he finally asked, trying to inject some normalcy into their conversation. Mia shrugged, her focus still on the pot. "Fine. Same as usual. Took the boys to school, ran some errands, nothing exciting." Ethan nodded, though he wasn't really listening. He was too distracted by the thoughts that had been circling his mind for months now. They had been together for so long, had shared so much, but lately, he felt like they were living in two separate worlds. Mia was here, physically, but she was somewhere else emotionally. He couldn't put his finger on it, but something was off. "I was thinking," Ethan began, his voice softer now, "maybe we should take a weekend for ourselves. Just the two of us. We haven't really had time alone together in a while." Mia paused for a moment, her hand stopping its steady stirring of the pot. She didn't look at him, but he could sense the hesitation in her posture. "I don't know," she said, her voice careful. "The boys, they need us here." "They're fine, Mia. We could ask my mom to watch them. It's just a couple of days." This time, she turned to face him. There was something in her eyes, something guarded, as if the suggestion itself had hit a nerve. "I just think it's not a good time right now, Ethan," she said more firmly this time. "Maybe later." He wanted to argue, to push back and ask why. But the look in her eyes told him she wasn't in the mood for a discussion. So he let it go, for now. As the evening wore on, the conversation over dinner was as dull and lifeless as it had been for months. They spoke about the children, about appointments and school projects, but never about them. Ethan's mind wandered again, drifting back to those early, desperate years of trying to conceive. He had never felt more helpless than during that time, watching Mia go through every test, every treatment, while they both carried the silent weight of disappointment. But then, miraculously, after 4 long years, Mia got pregnant. The joy that surged through their lives at that moment had been unlike anything else. They had made it. They had overcome. It was the miracle that had saved them, had brought them back from the brink. Or so he had thought. "Ethan?" Mia's voice cut through his thoughts. You've barely touched your food," she said, her tone gentle but distant. "Yeah, I'm just tired, I guess." He forced a small smile, trying to cover the turmoil beneath the surface. "I think I'm going to turn in early tonight." Mia nodded, her face unreadable. "I'll clean up. Good night." As Ethan made his way upstairs, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease that clung to him. There was a time when he could sense every shift in Mia's mood, when they were so in sync that words weren't necessary to understand each other. But now, she felt like a stranger, someone he couldn't reach no matter how hard he tried. In their bedroom, Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the floor. His mind replayed the last 10 years, trying to pinpoint where things had started to unravel. Was it during the years they struggled to conceive? The weight of infertility had hung over them like a cloud, but they had weathered it together. Or so he had believed. As he lay down, his mind wandered again to the thought that had been creeping into his consciousness more and more lately. What if the miracle they had prayed for hadn't saved them at all? What if it had only delayed the inevitable? He closed his eyes, trying to push the thoughts away, but they lingered, gnawing at him, whispering that there was something he still didn't know. Something Mia wasn't telling him. The next morning, Ethan woke up with a knot in his stomach. The uneasy feeling that had settled over him the night before lingered, refusing to loosen its grip. Mia was already up by the time he opened his eyes, her side of the bed neatly made. It was still early, the soft morning light filtering through the curtains, but there was no peace in the quiet of the house. As he went downstairs, he found Mia sitting at the kitchen table, sipping her coffee and scrolling through her phone. She looked up briefly, offering him a half-hearted smile. "Morning," she said, her voice neutral. "Morning," Ethan replied, heading to the coffee machine. He poured himself a cup, feeling the weight of unsaid words between them. It was as if they were stuck in a routine, going through the motions without really being present. For a moment, Ethan considered bringing up last night's conversation about the weekend away. He could feel it eating at him. The desire to ask her why she seemed so distant, why she had shut him down so quickly. But the guarded look in her eyes told him she wasn't ready to talk. "Do you have anything planned for today?" Mia asked, breaking the silence. Ethan took a sip of his coffee, shrugging. "Not much. I thought I might clean out the attic later. It's been a while." Mia nodded, her gaze drifting back to her phone. "Okay, I'll probably take the boys out to the park for a bit." And that was it. The conversation ended as abruptly as it had begun, both of them retreating into their separate worlds. Ethan finished his coffee in silence, the unease gnawing at him once again. A couple of hours later, after Mia had left with the boys, Ethan made his way up to the attic. The old wooden stairs creaked beneath his weight as he ascended, the musty smell of the attic hitting him as he reached the top. It was a small, cramped space filled with boxes of forgotten belongings, old furniture, and remnants of their life before kids. He hadn't spent much time up here in recent years, but the attic had always been a place that held a certain nostalgia for him. It was where they'd stored all the mementos of their early marriage, photo albums, love letters, keepsakes from trips they had taken together. Back then, they had believed their love was unbreakable, strong enough to weather any storm. Ethan started with the boxes near the back, sifting through old clothes, books, and photo frames. He smiled faintly as he pulled out an old photo album from their honeymoon in Italy. He flipped through the pages, remembering the warmth of those sunny days, the laughter that had once come so easily between them. They had been so in love then, so certain that nothing could ever come between them. But that certainty had faded over the years, slowly eroded by the struggles they had faced. The infertility treatments, the endless doctor visits, the crushing disappointment month after month. It had taken its toll on both of them. But when Mia had finally gotten pregnant, it had felt like the answer to all their prayers. the miracle that would heal the fractures in their relationship. Ethan had believed, with all his heart, that the twins were their second chance. As he moved another box aside, something caught his eye. It was small, tucked away at the bottom of a pile of papers, a leather-bound book with a worn cover. Curious, Ethan picked it up, his fingers brushing over the soft, weathered leather. He had never seen it before. The moment he opened the first page, he recognized Mia's handwriting. It was her diary. For a moment, he hesitated. This was personal, something meant only for her. But as he held it in his hands, the nagging feeling in his gut grew stronger. There were things he didn't understand about Mia, things that had changed between them, and part of him wondered if this diary held the answers. Ethan sat down on an old wooden chair, the diary heavy in his lap. He opened it to the first page, his eyes scanning the familiar handwriting. The early entries were simple, full of reflections on their daily lives, their plans for the future. She wrote about their early years of marriage, about her excitement to start a family, and her hopes for the future. But as he read on, the entries shifted. The tone became darker, more vulnerable, and Ethan felt a growing sense of unease as he turned the pages. One entry, in particular, caught his attention. "We've been trying for over a year now and nothing seems to work. Every month feels like another failure. I know Ethan is hurting too, but I don't know how to talk to him about it. Sometimes I feel like I'm drowning in this weight of expectation, like I'm supposed to be able to fix everything, to make this happen. But what if I can't?" Ethan's heart clenched as he read her words. He had never known Mia had felt this way. She had always seemed so strong, so determined to make it work. He hadn't realized how much the pressure had affected her. He continued reading, flipping through more entries. They were full of her fears and insecurities, her frustration with the process of trying to conceive. It was clear she had been struggling in ways he hadn't fully understood. But then, the entries took a darker turn. "I'm starting to feel like maybe I don't want this as much as I thought I did. Ethan is so sure, so ready to be a father. But what if I'm not? What if I'm not cut out for this? I can't tell him. He'd be devastated. I don't even know if I can admit it to myself." Ethan's hands trembled as he read the words. He had never suspected that Mia had doubts about having children. She had always been so committed, so focused on making it work. Or at least, that's what he had believed. He flipped ahead to more recent entries, hoping to find something that would explain the change in her. One entry, written shortly before she got pregnant, stood out. "I don't know if I can keep pretending anymore. Every day, it feels like I'm living a lie. I love Ethan, but I'm not sure I want the same things he does. He wants a family so badly, but what if I don't? What if I never did? I've been trying so hard to be the person he needs me to be, but I don't know how much longer I can keep this up." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as the words sunk in. Mia had been pretending all along. She had been hiding her true feelings, pushing down her doubts, her fears, all for his sake. The life they had built, the family they had fought for, had been based on a lie. His mind raced, trying to piece together what this meant. If Mia had been so uncertain, so full of doubt, then how had she gotten pregnant? What had changed? There were no more answers in the diary, only more questions. Ethan closed the book, his hands trembling. The woman he had shared his life with for 10 years had been hiding her deepest fears from him. And now he didn't know what to believe. All he knew was that things were not as they seemed, and he needed to find out the truth. Ethan sat in the attic for what felt like hours, the silence pressing in around him. The weight of Mia's diary, now closed in his lap, felt unbearable. His mind churned with the words he had read, turning them over and over, trying to make sense of everything. The woman he had loved for a decade had harbored secrets, doubts, and fears that she had never shared with him. He felt like he was standing on the edge of a precipice, looking down into an abyss that had always been there, just beneath the surface of their lives. He had to confront her. He had to know the truth. But as he stood and placed the diary back where he had found it, a small voice in his head told him to wait. Confronting Mia now, with nothing but suspicions and fragments of her thoughts, would only lead to more questions. He needed clarity, more information, something that would tell him how things had truly gone so wrong. Over the next few days, Ethan kept his routine as normal as possible, though it was becoming increasingly difficult to hide his unease. Mia, for her part, seemed oblivious to the storm brewing inside him. She went about her days as she always did, taking care of the boys, running errands, making small talk over dinner. But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that everything she did now was part of some elaborate act, a facade she had carefully constructed to hide the truth. Late one evening, when Mia was asleep and the house was quiet, Ethan found himself back in the attic. He knew the answers he was looking for weren't going to be in the everyday conversations they had been having. He needed to dig deeper, to find out what Mia hadn't been telling him. He pulled down one of the larger boxes that hadn't been touched in years. It was full of old documents, letters, and cards from their early days together. As he sifted through them, a familiar name caught his eye: Lucas, Mia's brother. Lucas had always been a part of their lives, though not an overwhelming presence. He lived in a different state and only visited occasionally. Ethan had always thought of him as a good guy, friendly, charming, a little mysterious, but never someone who raised alarm bells. But now, as Ethan's mind raced through all the fragments of his conversations with Mia, he realized something had always felt off about Lucas. Mia rarely talked about her brother, but whenever she did, there was a subtle shift in her demeanor. She would smile in a way that was different from her usual smiles, and there was a light in her eyes that Ethan had never fully understood. He hadn't paid much attention to it before. It had seemed harmless. But now, as he pieced everything together, Ethan felt a cold knot forming in his stomach. He pulled out some old letters from Lucas to Mia, their correspondence spanning years. They were casual, filled with updates about his life, his work, and memories of their childhood together. But one letter, buried deep at the bottom of the pile, felt different. It was dated a little over 5 years ago, right around the time Mia had become pregnant. The handwriting was Lucas's, but the tone was more intimate, almost confessional. Mia, I know things between us have always been complicated, but I can't stop thinking about you. The way you look at me, the way we understand each other. There's something there that I can't ignore. I don't know how to handle this. I don't know what it means for us, but I can't pretend anymore. Ethan's hands shook as he read the words. The letter was vague, but the implications were clear. There had been something between Mia and Lucas, something that went beyond the bond of siblings. His heart pounded in his chest as the sickening realization began to take hold. He kept reading. I know you're married, and I tried to be respectful of that, but it's been harder lately. I think about you all the time, Mia. I don't know what we're doing, or if we should even be doing it, but I can't stop. I know you feel it too. Ethan felt his stomach drop. He reread the letter, trying to make sense of what it was implying. Lucas and Mia, his own wife, had been involved in something that went far beyond a normal sibling relationship. It was clear that whatever had happened between them had been building for years, hidden beneath the surface of family gatherings and casual visits. Suddenly, it all made sense. Mia's distance, her reluctance to go away with him, the hidden doubts about their life together. Ethan's mind raced back to the diary. Mia had never wanted children with him. The words she had written echoed in his mind, but now they were laced with a horrifying new meaning. If she hadn't wanted children with him, who had she wanted them with? Lucas. The truth hit him like a tidal wave. The twins, his sons, they weren't his. Ethan stumbled backward, the weight of the realization knocking the air from his lungs. He felt like the ground had been ripped out from beneath him, leaving him free-falling into a nightmare. All those years, every moment he had spent believing that the twins had been the miracle that saved his marriage, had been a lie. Lucas was their father. Ethan sat down hard, his legs no longer able to hold him up. His mind was spinning, the walls of the attic closing in around him. How could this have happened? How had he missed it? The signs had been there, but he had been too blind, too trusting to see them. As he sat there, his thoughts turned dark. Anger began to boil beneath his skin, an anger so deep and visceral it felt like it might consume him. Mia had betrayed him in the worst possible way, and Lucas, his own brother-in-law, had taken everything from him. But he couldn't confront her yet. Not without proof. Not without knowing everything. Ethan stood up, breathing heavily. He was no longer the man he had been an hour ago. He was someone else now. Someone who would stop at nothing to uncover the full truth and take back what had been stolen from him that had asked about her day, all while the anger and betrayal simmered just beneath the surface. Mia didn't seem to notice the change in him. She smiled and chatted as if nothing was wrong, completely unaware that her carefully constructed world was about to crumble. Ethan began gathering information, small, subtle pieces that would help him build his case. He started paying closer attention to Mia's phone conversations, especially when she spoke with Lucas. Their calls had always seemed innocent enough before, but now, every word was laced with hidden meaning. Ethan found excuses to walk into the room while Mia was on the phone with Lucas, listening carefully to her tone, her laughter. She didn't say anything overt, but Ethan knew how to read between the lines now. One afternoon, while Mia was out with the boys, Ethan logged into her computer, something he had never done before. She had left it on the kitchen counter, and curiosity got the better of him. He felt a slight pang of guilt as he typed in her password, one he knew from years ago. But the guilt was quickly drowned out by the need for answers. He combed through her emails, scrolling past innocuous exchanges with friends and work colleagues. But then there it was, an email from Lucas. His heart pounded as he opened it. "Hey Mia, I was thinking about that weekend we spent together last year. Do you remember the cabin? I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. Let me know if you ever want to get away again. We'll find a way." Ethan's blood ran cold. The cabin. Last year, Mia had told him she was going on a girls' trip with some old college friends. She had spent the weekend at a cabin up north, far away from home. She had even posted pictures of the trip, smiling alongside her friends as they sat by the lake. It had seemed innocent at the time, but now he knew better. Lucas had been there with her. The whole trip had been a lie, just like everything else. Ethan closed the email, his hands trembling with rage. He forced himself to breathe, to stay calm. He couldn't afford to lose control, not yet. He needed to keep his head clear if his plan was going to work. Over the next few weeks, Ethan carefully began documenting everything. He kept a private journal. Ironic, he thought, given that Mia's own diary had been the key to uncovering the truth. He noted every suspicious call, every email he found, every subtle interaction between Mia and Lucas. He collected everything he could, preparing for the moment when he would finally expose her for what she had done. Meanwhile, Ethan began subtly undermining Mia's mental state. It wasn't difficult. She had always been prone to anxiety, especially during stressful times. He started moving things around the house, small objects like her keys or her phone, just enough to make her second-guess herself. When she couldn't find them, he would act concerned, suggesting that she might be overworked or distracted. "It's probably just stress," he would say gently, his voice laced with false concern. "You've been under a lot of pressure lately." Mia would nod, her brow furrowed, clearly frustrated with herself. "Yeah, I guess you're right. I've just been feeling so scattered lately." Ethan nodded sympathetically, all the while hiding the satisfaction that came from seeing her slowly unravel. He knew it wasn't enough just to expose her affair. He needed her to doubt herself, to question her own sanity. It was the only way to make sure she wouldn't fight him when the time came to take the boys. As the weeks went on, Ethan's plan began to take shape. He consulted a lawyer discreetly, making sure everything was in place for when he filed for divorce. His lawyer, a sharp and calculating woman, advised him on how to build the strongest case for full custody of the twins. He explained the situation as carefully as he could without revealing the full extent of Mia's betrayal. He wasn't ready to air all of their dirty laundry just yet. At home, Ethan continued playing the devoted husband, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He had to time it just right, wait for Mia to feel comfortable, secure in the illusion that their life was still intact. But deep down Ethan knew that day was coming. Soon, Mia would wake up to a world she no longer controlled. She would realize too late that the man she had deceived was no longer the same man who had loved her unconditionally for all those years. He had become something else, and he wasn't going to stop until he had taken everything back from her. Weeks had passed since Ethan had first uncovered the truth, but to Mia, everything seemed normal. She was unaware of the trap being set around her. Ethan's careful plotting, his subtle manipulation of her mind, was working. He had noticed the changes in her behavior, how she would stop mid-sentence, confused, unsure of what she was about to say. Her once confident steps were now hesitant, her gaze clouded with doubt. The woman who had betrayed him was slowly unraveling, and Ethan could feel the moment of reckoning drawing closer. One evening, as they sat together after putting the boys to bed, Ethan made his move. They hadn't had a real conversation in weeks, and the silence between them was suffocating. Mia sat on the couch, absently flipping through a magazine, her eyes distant. "Mia," Ethan said, his voice steady. She looked up at him, surprised by the serious tone in his voice. "We need to talk." She closed the magazine, her brows furrowing. About what? About us, he replied, sitting down across from her. About everything. Mia's expression shifted, a flicker of nervousness crossing her face. What do you mean? Ethan leaned forward, his gaze piercing. I know what's been going on, Mia. I know about you and Lucas. The color drained from her face. For a moment, she said nothing, her mouth opening slightly as if to speak, but no words came out. She looked like she had just been punched in the gut. What are you talking about? She finally whispered, her voice shaky. Don't lie to me, Ethan said, his voice firm. I've seen the emails. I've read the letters. I know what you've been hiding from me all these years. Mia's hands trembled as she pressed them into her lap, her eyes wide with shock. Ethan, it's not what you think. It's exactly what I think, he interrupted, his voice low and cold. You've been having an affair with your brother. You've been lying to me, to our family for years. And the boys? Mia flinched at the mention of the twins. Her lips quivered, and she finally looked away, unable to meet his gaze. Ethan, please? I can't explain. Explain? Ethan's voice was barely a whisper now, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. You've destroyed everything. I gave you my heart, my trust, and you threw it all away. You've been living a lie, and you've dragged me into it. Mia's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time in a long time, she seemed genuinely afraid. I didn't mean for it to happen like this, she stammered. I never wanted to hurt you. I love you, Ethan. Love. Ethan stood up, unable to sit still any longer. Don't talk to me about love. You don't know what love is. You've been using me, lying to me, and you think you can just say you love me, and that makes it all better? Mia wiped her eyes, her voice trembling. I was confused. I've been confused for a long time. Lucas and I, we have a complicated history. But it doesn't change the fact that I love you, Ethan. I never wanted to destroy our family. Ethan let out a bitter laugh, pacing the room. A complicated history? You call this complicated? You've been sleeping with your brother, Mia. You lied about everything. And the twins. His voice broke slightly as he said their names, the pain too raw to contain. They're not even mine. Mia sobbed, her head in her hands, shaking as the weight of her deception crashed down around her. I'm so sorry, Ethan. I never meant for it to go this far. I never wanted to lose you. But her words only fueled his anger. You already lost me, he said coldly. The moment you decided to betray me, you lost everything. For a moment, the room was filled with the sound of Mia's quiet sobs. Ethan stood there, watching her crumble, but there was no satisfaction in it. No matter how much he had prepared himself for this moment, no matter how much he had imagined her breaking down, it didn't fill the emptiness inside him. I've spoken to a lawyer, Ethan said finally, breaking the silence. I'm filing for divorce. I'll be seeking full custody of the boys. Mia looked up, her tear-streaked face pale with horror. Ethan, no, please. Don't take the boys away from me. They're not yours, Ethan spat, his voice hardening. They were never yours to begin with. Don't say that, Mia cried, standing up, desperate. You're their father. You've been there for them since the day they were born. You're the only father they've ever known. And you took that from me? Ethan replied, his voice barely above a whisper. You let me believe they were mine, let me love them, all while knowing the truth. They need you, Ethan, Mia begged, reaching out to him. You're still their father no matter what. They love you, and you love them. Please, don't take them away. Ethan clenched his fists, his heart pounding in his chest. The twins, Noah and Liam, were the only thing in this whole mess that still mattered to him. Despite everything, they were innocent. They hadn't asked for this. And no matter what, he couldn't walk away from them. But he wasn't going to let Mia keep them. She had ruined everything else, but she wasn't going to ruin them too. I'll be filing for full custody, Ethan said again, his voice like steel. I have all the evidence I need to prove that you're unfit to raise them. You lied, you manipulated me, and I'll make sure the court knows that. Mia's face crumbled, her sobs racking her body. Please, Ethan, please don't do this. But Ethan had made up his mind. This is over, Mia. You've taken everything from me, and now it's my turn. He turned to leave, but as he reached the door, Mia's broken voice stopped him. I never wanted this, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I never wanted to hurt you. Ethan paused for a moment, his hand on the doorknob. It's too late for that. And with that, He walked out, leaving her alone in the shattered remains of the life they had built together. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Ethan moved through them with a single-minded focus, finalizing the divorce, collecting evidence for the custody case, and making sure every detail was perfectly orchestrated to leave Mia with nothing. He wasn't just severing their marriage. He was tearing down every piece of the life they had built together, brick by brick. Mia had tried to fight him at first, but it was no use. Ethan's lawyer had gathered enough evidence to paint her as unstable, emotionally fragile, and unfit to raise the children. The court documents he had prepared were thorough. Emails between her and Lucas, the personal diary entries, and a carefully crafted narrative that depicted Mia as a woman who had lost her grip on reality. The judge saw it too. It didn't take long before the tide turned in Ethan's favor. The day of the final hearing, Mia sat across from him in the courtroom, her eyes swollen and red from days of crying. She looked like a shadow of the woman she once was, her usual calm demeanor replaced with exhaustion and fear. Ethan watched her crumble silently as the judge awarded him full custody of the twins. There was no fight left in her. She simply nodded, accepting her fate as though she knew it was inevitable. When it was over, Mia approached Ethan one last time outside the courthouse. Her voice was small, weak. "I just want to see them," she whispered, barely able to look him in the eye. "Please, Ethan, don't take them away from me completely." Ethan stood tall, the papers clutched in his hands, papers that declared him the sole guardian of Noah and Liam, that cut Mia out of their lives. He had won, and yet, as he looked down at her, he felt none of the satisfaction he thought he would. "I'll think about it," Ethan replied coldly, turning away without another word. Back at the house, the boys were playing in the living room, blissfully unaware of the chaos that had unfolded around them. They had asked about Mia, of course, but Ethan had been vague in his answers, telling them that Mommy needed some time away. They didn't understand the depth of what had happened, and he wasn't sure how or if he would ever explain it to them. As Ethan watched them play, a strange emptiness settled over him. He had won. He had taken everything from Mia just as she had taken from him. But now, standing in the aftermath of his victory, he felt hollow. The twins laughed as they built towers of blocks, their innocent joy filling the room. Ethan smiled faintly, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. He had loved them fiercely from the moment they were born, and that love hadn't changed. But the knowledge that they weren't his, biologically at least, gnawed at him. He had raised them, cared for them, and been there for every important moment of their lives. And yet, when he looked at them now, he couldn't help but see the shadow of Lucas. Lucas. Even the thought of him sent a jolt of anger through Ethan. Lucas had disappeared after the truth came out, no doubt ashamed of what he had done. But the damage had already been done. He had taken something that could never be returned. As the weeks went on, Ethan tried to settle into the new normal, but there was a darkness that followed him everywhere. He couldn't look at Mia's old things without feeling a mixture of hatred and sadness. Every room in the house reminded him of the life they had once had, of the years they had spent together, of the betrayal that had torn them apart. One night, after putting the twins to bed, Ethan sat at the kitchen table, a glass of whiskey in front of him. The house was quiet, save for the ticking of the clock on the wall. He stared at the glass, swirling the amber liquid inside, his mind wandering back over everything that had happened. He had thought that revenge would make him feel whole again, that stripping Mia of everything would heal the wounds she had left behind. But now, sitting here in the silence, he wasn't so sure. Yes, he had taken the boys, and yes, Mia was gone from his life. But the victory tasted bitter. Ethan got up and walked to the window, looking out at the darkened street. He had spent so much time focused on his anger, on his need for justice, that he hadn't stopped to think about the toll it had taken on him. He had become consumed by it, driven by a desire for control, for power. And now, standing on the other side of it all, he realized that he had lost something of himself along the way. He wasn't the same man anymore. The Ethan who had loved Mia, who had believed in their life together, was gone. In his place was someone colder, more calculating, someone who had been willing to manipulate and destroy to get what he wanted. He had won, but at what cost? The next day, as Ethan was getting ready for work, his phone buzzed with a message. It was from Mia. He hesitated, staring at the screen. He hadn't heard from her since the court hearing, and part of him had hoped it would stay that way. But as he opened the message, he saw it was brief, almost tentative. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I deserve to see them again. But please just let me say goodbye, for their sake. Ethan stared at the message for a long time, his heart heavy. He had every reason to say no. Mia had lied to him, betrayed him, shattered their family. But she was still the mother of his children, whether he liked it or not. He thought about the twins, about the life they would grow up with. He had fought for them, for their future, but was cutting Mia out of their lives completely the right thing to do? Could he live with himself, knowing he had deprived them of their mother? With a deep breath, Ethan typed a reply. You can see them, but it's on my terms. He sent the message, and stood there for a moment, staring at the screen. His heart felt heavy, but there was also a strange sense of relief. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe there was a way forward, even if it wasn't the future he had once imagined. Ethan walked into the living room where the boys were playing, their laughter filling the air. As he watched them, he realized that in the end it wasn't about revenge or justice. It was about them. It was always about them. As he watched the boys play, he realized the future was uncertain, but it was his to shape, one choice at a time.